Welcome back everyone, I'm Nick, this is Swiftful Thinking, and we are building a cryptocurrency app. And in this video, we are going to start building our first view, which is the home view, and we're going to actually build a custom header at the top of the view. Now in a lot of beginner SwiftUI apps, we usually use the navigation bar as just a default header at the top of our screen. But in this app, because we're making a little bit more of a custom feel, we're gonna actually use a navigation view, but we're gonna hide the bar and create our own custom header. So that's what we're gonna focus on in this video.
All right, welcome back everyone. So I'm back in our Xcode project, of course. And in this video, we're gonna start setting up our home screen. I have an actual simulator of what we're building here. But in this video, we're gonna set up the basics of this screen and add this top bar here. So we have this button on the left, we have the title in the center, and then we have a button on the right. And if I click the button, it's actually going to change the title and add a little animation around this button because this button also changed to a plus sign. So if you look at this eye, when I click it, it animates and then it turns to a plus. So this header is what we're going to set up now. So although we're using MVVM architecture, this app is actually going to be much more complicated than my previous course if you follow the to-do list course. And because of that, the way we're going to set up our folders isn't exactly model view model. It's a little more complicated than that when you start getting into these more complex apps. So what we're going to do here is let's fold up the extensions and let's right click and create another new group, and let's call this core. And I'm going to move it below the extensions, and then inside this core is going to be all of the views and the view models in our app. So inside this core, I'm going to create another folder. So let's right click it, create a group, and this is going to be the home folder. So all of the views and the view models for the home page are going to be in this folder. So in here, let's create a new group. We'll call it views. And let's right click one more time and create view models folder. In our views folder, let's finally right click, create a new file. And it's going to be a SwiftUI view. And we're going to call this home view. Go ahead and click create. Once you're inside, click resume on the canvas, make sure we're all connected. Let's set this up real simply. We're going to add a Z stack, open the brackets. We're going to add a background layer, and the background color is going to be the color from our theme. So we're going to say color.theme.background. Let's make it ignore safe area, and let's write a little comment here that this is the background layer. And then on top of this, we're going to have a content layer. And this is going to have a V stack. We'll open the parentheses. And we haven't built the header out, of course, but let's just add a text saying header for a second. And let's add a spacer at the bottom. Let's give it a minimum length of 0, so it can be 0 if it needs to be. And that should push our header up to the top, but still within that safe area. And although we're not using the titles from a navigation view, we are going to use the navigation links so that we can segue around our app really efficiently. So because of that, I want to embed this entire home view into a navigation view. And we could do that directly in this view, but my personal preference is to just do it way at the beginning of our app in our app.swift file. So I'm going to jump into our app.swift file. This again is the first file that runs in your app. This is where the app main call is. And then right now, content view is going to be the first view in our app. But we're not going to use the content view, so instead we're going to add a navigation view here. We're going to open the brackets. Inside the navigation view, we're going to add a home view, which is what we just created. Open and close parentheses. And now because we're building our own header at the top, we don't want the default navigation view bar at the top. So we're going to call here .navigation title navigation bar hidden, and we'll set that equal to true. So this way that bar doesn't show up on the home view. All right, so now let's jump back into the home view. And just to be sure, let's replicate that same environment on the preview here. So we're going to put the preview inside a navigation view. We're going to put our home view inside. And you can see there's space at the top above the header right now because the navigation bar is there. But we know that we are navigation bar hidden is true. so that space goes away. It's always a good idea to have your previews have the same environment as they would in the actual app. This way you get a better understanding of what it's going to actually look like. And the next thing we're going to do is build out those circle buttons that you saw on the top left and the top right of this view. And because it's going to be a component that we reuse a bunch of times, I'm going to actually make it its own view. So this way we can reuse it. So over in our core folder, outside of the home, I'm going to create another folder, new group. I'm going to call it components. And so the difference here is the views that are in the home are going to be specific for that home view, for that screen. But all the views that are in the components folder are going to be reusable so that we can use them on a bunch of different views in our app. They're not specific to one specific screen. So in this components, I'm going to right click, create another group. We'll call this circle button. And in here, we're going to finally right click, create a new file. It's going to be a SwiftUI view. And let's call this circle button view. Go ahead and click create. When we're in here, let's click resume on the canvas. All right, and the first thing I want to do is change the preview because this is not going to be a full screen. This is going to be a little icon, a little button. So we're going to change the preview to .preview layout .size that fits. And we'll just add a little bit of padding around it just to make it look a little bit better. So let's start building out our button. So our button is basically going to be an image. So we'll add an image here. And we're going to use a system icon. So we'll use the system name. And for right now, let's just add heart.fill just to get the heart icon here. We're going to change the size of the image by using .font, and we'll use headline. We'll change the color by calling .foreground color. And we will make the accent color, of course, part of our theme. We'll use color.theme.accent. Let's set the exact size of these buttons to be a frame, a width of 50, a height of 50. We don't need the alignment because it is center by default. And then behind this image, let's add a circle. So we'll do .background. Here we'll add a circle. And the circle by default is black, but let's change it to a foreground color of color.theme.background, which should be white. After this background layer, let's add a shadow. Let's use the one with the color here so we can customize the shadow color. And let's put these on separate lines. So we'll have color and then we'll have the radius down here. The color is going to be color.theme.accent. I'm using the same as the foreground color of the icon. And I'm going to call .opacity 0.25. So it's a little bit lighter than the actual color. And then for the radius, we'll do 10, and we'll put it right in the center with 0 and 0, X and Y. Finally, I'm going to add a little bit of padding around this just to make it a little bit bigger, and we can probably get rid of the padding down in our preview. That looks good. Let's just make sure it looks good in dark mode as well. So let's add a group to our preview, open the brackets. I'm going to cut this and paste it twice. And then on the second one, I'm going to call .color scheme, and we'll put this one as dark. So in dark mode, we have a pink icon and a black background. All right, and finally, I want to be able to just change out this icon for any icon that I want instead of just the heart. So up here, let's add a let icon name of type string. And then we're going to take that icon name and just pass it in here. So our initializer is now going to ask us for an icon name every time we create a circle button view. So down here, when we're creating them, we can fix our preview and we can add our icon names here. So let's just do info and maybe plus. Click resume on the canvas. We should now see two different icons. We got our eye, we have our plus sign. I think these buttons are looking really good. I'm going to now jump back into our home view where we have our header. And up here where we have our header text, let's actually add an H stack. Open the brackets. On the left side of the H stack, I'm going to add one of these buttons. So we'll call circle button view. Open the parentheses, and I'm just going to use the info. Then I'm going to add another one. We'll call circle button view. Open the parentheses, and this icon will be chevron.right. Let's take this header text, put it between the two. And then I'm going to add spacers between the buttons and the text just to push everything outward. Finally, on the entire H stack, let's add some padding of horizontal. And now our header is really starting to come together. Let's change the text here to say live prices. Let's give it a font of headline. Let's give it a font weight of heavy. And finally, let's give it a foreground color of color.theme.accent, which is our black, and that's why it still looks black. And when we click on this right icon here, I want to change the icon on the left and also rotate this icon so that it points left instead of right. So on the home view, I'm going to create an @state private var. Let's call it show portfolio of type bool, and we'll set it equal to false. And I'm making it private here. I know in most of my videos so far, I haven't really touched on the private versus public thing, but when you are building complex apps, you should always try to make your variables, you should always try to make everything as private as possible. So by adding this word private, we are basically telling the code that we're only going to access this show portfolio variable within this view. We're never going to be able to access it from another file, from another class, from another struct, only within this view, and that's why we make it private. So I'm going to be doing that a lot throughout this course, just a heads up. All right, so when we tap on this circle button view, let's add a .tap gesture. And we want to change this show portfolio, and we're going to do it with animation. So we'll do with animation .spring, open the brackets, and we'll call show portfolio .toggle. And then on this chevron .right here, we want to rotate it so that it faces the other way if we're showing the portfolio. So we'll call .rotation effect. We'll add an angle, and we'll use the degrees. And in here, we're going to basically just animate the angle based on show portfolio. So we'll say show portfolio question mark. If show portfolio, let's rotate it 180 degrees, so the opposite of where it's facing now. Otherwise, 0. Let's resume the canvas real quick. Click play on the canvas, and when I click this, it should now rotate and rotate back. That looks pretty good. I also want to change this icon here from an I to a plus if we're in the portfolio mode. So on this icon name here, I'm going to change this. We're going to say show portfolio question mark. If we're showing portfolio, we're going to use the plus. Otherwise, we'll use info. So let's try it now. And it's working, but there actually is a little bit of animation that's happening there, and it looks a little funky. So to get rid of that animation, I'm just going to call .animation.none on this circle button view. So now it should switch without that weird animation that we were seeing a second ago. We're going to do the same thing for the live prices. We're going to say, in this text, we're going to say show portfolio question mark. If so, we'll have it say portfolio. Otherwise, live prices. And again, when we click it, it's going to have this weird little animation. It's going to try to animate in and out, which doesn't really look good. So underneath this foreground color, we're going to call it .animation.none. And now we should be able to switch from live prices to the portfolio. The last thing I want to do in this video is when we switch, I want the user to really know that we are changing this icon, because the action that they click when it's the info versus when it's the plus is going to be different. So because of that, we're going to add a little bit of animation when this switches to a plus. So the easiest way I've found this is to actually make it its own view. So underneath this circle button view here, where we have the actual circle button, we're going to right click, create a new file. This will be a SwiftUI view. I'm going to call this circle button animation view. Click create. Click resume. All right. And in here, I'm going to add a circle. Let's give it a .stroke width with a line width of 5.0 maybe. And we want to add some animation. So up here, we'll create an @state private var. We'll call it animate of type bool, and we'll set it equal to false. And then on the circle, we're going to animate it. We're going to animate this scale. So we'll say .scale. And here we're going to say animate. If we are animating, we're going to scale up to 100% or 1.0. But if animate is false, we're going to start at 0. So this will start at 0 scale when it's false, and then when we change it to true, it will animate from 0 up to 1.0. So if we click resume on the canvas, we should actually not see it right now. And just for a second, on this .onAppear, I'm going to open the brackets. I'm going to call animate.toggle. So when this appears, it should then animate onto the screen. And it looks like it just did it without animation. So we're going to add animation to this entire circle here. So I'm going to add .animation. And we'll say animate ? And if we are animating, we're going to use the animation.ease out with a duration of 1.0. So it takes 1 second to animate. Then we're going to say otherwise, if we are not animating, the type of animation on this circle should be .none. And this is a little complex if you haven't used much animation before, but basically we're adding this line here because we only want to animate in one direction. So if we switch this to true, we're going to have animation of ease in out. But if we switch this to false, it's not going to animate back to false. Instead, there is no animation. It's just going to jump back to the starting state. So if I click resume on the canvas one more time, we get that nice animation here. I'll do it one more time, stop it, and then press play. It should animate up. And then one more thing we're going to add is the .opacity. And if we are animating, let's do 0.0, otherwise 1.0. So as it gets bigger, it actually fades out a little bit. So let's press play. Now it looks kind of almost like a ripple effect where it comes up and then fades out. To make it a little more realistic, on this preview, I'm just going to add a frame with a width of 100, a height of 100. And let's also give it a foreground color of red down here, just so that we can see it. And I think it looks a little better. Let's stop it. All right, so when we press play on the simulator here, we should see that little red circle animate outward. It's a little hard to see because it happens so fast. So if we want, we can maybe change the duration just for testing to like 10 seconds. We should now be able to see it really slowly. It's getting bigger, and as it gets bigger, the opacity also lowers, so it looks like it's fading out a little bit. Let's change that back to 1 second. The last thing we're going to actually do is change this animation. Instead of handling whether or not animate is true or false directly on the onAppear or within this view, we're going to make a binding variable here. So we'll say binding, and bindings cannot be private. And we'll say animate of type bool, and this is going to actually be connected to something in our home view so that our home view can tell this circle button when to animate. We're going to get rid of this onAppear call, and we're going to fix this preview, and we're going to fix this previews down here. We need to add a binding boolean in here. For our purposes, it doesn't really matter, so we're just going to call it .constant, and we're just going to set it equal to false for now. Alright, so now every time we add a circle animation view, it's going to ask us to bind to a boolean, and that's what we're going to do now. Let's jump into the home view. Click resume, make sure it's still connected. Alright, and on this eye, which is this circle button here, we're going to add a background. And the background is, of course, going to be our circle button animation view. Open the parentheses, and then we need to bind to a boolean to tell it when to animate. And we already have this show portfolio boolean because we want it to happen when we click the button. So here we'll add money sign show portfolio. Click resume on the canvas, and hopefully when I click this button now, we should see the slight little animation behind this eye. So let's click it, and there it was. And when we click it back, it should actually not animate because we set the animation to none. So no animation when we go back, animate when we go forward, none when we go back, animate when we go forward. I think that looks awesome. Alright, let's wrap up this video by just cleaning up our home view because this is already looking long and kind of ugly. So what we're going to do is take this H stack here. So I'm going to take this H stack and the padding horizontal. I'm going to cut it. let's go down underneath our preview here. Let's add an extension. We're going to extend HomeView and open the brackets. And by extending HomeView, we can then add code for the HomeView down in this extension part. And we're going to create a private var. We'll call this home header of type SomeView. Open the brackets. We're just going to paste that H stack and the padding inside here. So it's doing all the same stuff, except now we can just take our variable called home header and put it right here at the top of our content layer. Click resume. We're keeping our home view nice and short and readable, and everything looks great. Alright guys, our screen is starting to come together, but that is it for this video. So I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I'm Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.